I'm Ruth from Alexander Associates, back with another episode promoting women in engineering. I'm joined by Emily Owen, and Emily is going to talk us through her career and the highs and lows of her experiences so far. And thank you so much for coming and agreeing to do this, and we really appreciate it. Can you tell me a little bit about what your job role is now, and then we'll kind of talk about how you got there?
Yeah, so I'm a hydrologist with an environmental consultancy. My kind of bread and butter work is doing a lot of flood risk assessments and surface water drainage design, and a lot of that supports planning applications. But some of the work is also with retrofitting, looking at buildings for insurance, and that kind of element. And then I love picking up new things and diversifying what I do. So kind of the element I'm growing at the moment, it's more on the water management side of things.
Okay.
So I've picked up in kind of the last 12 months doing a bit of mine water management, looking more at water resource modelling.
What's water management?
So literally as it kind of sounds, in terms of every site, water comes in and comes out.
Yep.
If you get it wrong, you get flooding or you run out of water, particularly at sites that have high water use. So mine sites are a classic for needing to look at it very in depth, because they are in a lot of the time in water poor regions,
right,
but then use a huge amount of water. And it's partly their own business needs, but it also is now feeding with the ESG journey. They are probably one of the earliest industries that had to be looking at it just from a functionality of their businesses going into the future. So that kind of started for me in a very technical end of doing the water balance modelling,
right,
and looking at how water was moving through their systems and processes. And then it's kind of, I'm now moving across more now into some of the water security and looking at more sustainable water use.
Okay. I've worked in the water industry, that's what I recruit for 20 years, and we definitely struggle attracting people to the water sector. I think maybe it's not seen as, maybe it's not seen as interesting as other industries. So was there what led you to, I want to work in the water industry, I want to work on flood modelling? When did you start? Can you remember how young you were when you started thinking about engineering?
I almost feel like I never made a choice.
Right.
I guess going into A-levels, I still loved physical geography.
Right.
So that kind of made the decision of science with the geography side. And then I was getting very frustrated by the end of A2 of geography's a bit wishy-washy some of the time. And I was like, I want to do the science behind it. All of these things you should be able to apply what I'm doing in the other sciences to this. So I went and did earth sciences as my undergraduate. And then from there, it was the water element that really interested me. So I went and did a master's after that in hydrology and water resource management. And that's out of an engineering department. So I did that with Imperial. So that then kind of brought me back into an engineering world. And that probably was the point that I realised it was engineering, and that's actually where it's at.
Yeah. And when you were doing your university course, the split male to female, where did you go to university?
So I went to Durham for my undergraduate.
Okay.
And that, it probably was male dominated. It obviously sat inside essentially the traditional geology.
Yes.
I did my second year on exchange, so I then came back and got to do whatever I wanted because I wasn't on a traditional course anymore. Right. So I kind of, you definitely got changes depending on which of the modules you took, and the more environmental seems to draw in more women.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether that's because they're newer and it's less rigid anyway. They as a subject are completely evolving, so you can't really imagine what a person is that does that because there isn't a person already doing it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then my master's actually probably was female dominated, but it was also very multinational.
Okay, that's really good. So that you had a really positive experience of having women around you when you were at university and doing the course with you.
Yeah, for sure.
And have you found that's continued in your work placements, in your workplaces?
So there's a lot of women coming in now.
That's great.
The retention is not as good as it's shocked me, to
Right.
be sure, and it's
Yeah.
something I've obviously stayed. It's not something I'm planning to leave, and I find it quite strange sometimes when women are choosing to leave the industry still.
Do you know why? Because it's definitely something that we see is we're not retaining women in the industry, and it's trying to work out the reasons why. Do you any insights?
I haven't been able to put my finger on the reason why. I think it's very common when people do their exit interviews. I think particularly when women are leaving an industry, they tend to fall back on the backup safe solution, which is the family making and everything else.
Yeah.
And then everyone goes, oh, it's because they wanted to start a family. I'm not sure it actually is that simple a decision.
It's an easy statistic to put down, isn't it, for a company sometimes?
Yeah. I think that women have a tendency, and I think this is the same when I was at school, not many girls did physics, and I think women have this really bad habit of going, I don't want to be the only woman.
Yeah.
And getting scared by that concept. And it's like, well, if every woman says they don't want to be the woman in the room, there's going to be no women in the room.
Yeah.
But if all of you decide to go do it, then it's going to be a room full of women.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that does happen, I think, as people are getting older and making decisions outside of the workplace.
Yeah.
Sometimes they find it scarier almost. And I wonder whether that's part of it, is that they struggle to sometimes find themselves someone they identify with of where they're going. And
yeah, that's absolutely something. When we talk to our clients, we talk about when people look at you as a business, they're going to want somebody that they can identify with within your company. And if your whole board or the management structure is all men, actually, if you've got white middle class men, that's not attractive. If you're female or any diverse group is going to really struggle with that. Did you have somebody that was a mentor for you, that somebody you could look to and go, okay, they're a role model or they inspire me? Or
not so much in my own team. I would say, although I have a lot of male management, they have been very strong. And they are very comfortable with telling me to go ask someone else and maybe go speak to this person and lean on other women. They might not be doing the same job as you, but they do have some of the same experiences. So I think that's helpful. And it's, as our company's grown and there's more women in the office, I think that has helped bring in
brings in more women because it's a more attractive environment to work in.
And I'm naturally quite a chatty person, so I think it makes it easier on me. And I do sometimes worry, if you're very quiet, that those women aren't necessarily as obvious to you. And those contacts, I think, are really important on the bad days, of just having someone to go talk to. And like, you can't be sure if it's, I think sometimes you don't know, is it a discrimination thing or is it just a life thing? And when you're the only person that meets a criteria, you don't know the difference. So sometimes you just want to call someone up and be like, oh, I think this person's being this way with me because I'm a woman. And the person at the other end goes, well, actually, I think they're that way with everybody. Because you do start to personalise it sometimes because of that characteristic.
Have you been discriminated against in your career because you're a woman? Do you think you felt that?
I've definitely had moments when I've thought it. I don't know it's necessarily a clear-cut case that it is. And I think some of it that's difficult are also personality traits that have naturally been encouraged. I will always offer someone a cup of coffee or tea when they arrive somewhere, because that's what I was always brought up to do. And then I found that I was always getting asked to make tea and coffee for people when I was a junior. And until even when I had a junior male sat next to me, sometimes people would ask, will you go get me tea, coffee? And it's like, well, the kitchen's down there and I've got work to do.
And were you able to were you able to say that? Were you able to say, actually, I'm really busy, perhaps blah blah could do it this time, or did you just kind of think, oh God, I'll just do it, just keep the peace, it's just easier?
Sometimes I would say, I think that usually made it worse because I think people almost feel defensive. I reached a point that I actually spoke to some of the other people in the office and just said, I don't know that people are doing this on purpose, but this is how it's making me feel. And so they then made an offer, like made sure they offered.
Great.
And kind of intercepted it. Because again, whether it's a gender-based or personality thing, they weren't offering.
Yeah.
And that was part of why the situation was arising. And it's such a difficult one because we didn't have any admin support, and the horrible truth is 90% of admin are women.
Yeah.
So when you are the young female in a room, if you're expecting
bias, isn't there?
And it's really, really hard for people. They're uncomfortable or whatever. They're not in their home environment. But it was something that, when I was more junior, used to really get me going. Was I'm not here to make your tea.
No, I'm here to do my job, and I'm doing it. And talking about going kind of back to your really early education, and you said you talked about physics. Do you think that one of the things that we found is that in school, engineering just it's not a subject that's really talked about. It's not something that is discussed as a career. Was it ever discussed with you as a career? By the way, did you know that there's all these hundreds of jobs available to you in engineering, or was it ever talked about at careers fairs or?
So engineering it was, but I'm not sure whether it actually represented what engineering encompasses.
Yeah.
So I probably went to uni and I chose not to do engineering as my main kind of approach at that point, because I probably saw it as mechanical engineering and not much else.
Yeah.
And there are just so many elements to engineering that aren't mentioned. And I think I love doing geography, and that element of linking those together were really important to me.
Yeah.
And they didn't quite know where to put me because it kind of falls between the traditional subjects because it involves so many of them.
But actually, with what you were interested in, there were so many things that you could have gone into under the engineering banner without having to do a civil degree or a mechanical degree or a chemical process degree, something like that.
Yeah, and seeing those options. And I also personally feel that A-levels are very limiting if you want to go into applied science routes.
Yes.
Because you can't, particularly if you're wanting to look at environmental engineering side of things, because geography does have a lot of important skills in there, and people will naturally study it who are interested. But you can't do the three sciences, maths and geography, which means you're limited at 16.
And what do you think schools could do better at kind of when you're in because we're hoping to get these videos to schools as well, so that people have we want women to understand that there are so many jobs available to you. Was there anything that would have been, if only they'd told me that, and if they'd said that, or if someone had pointed that out to me, it would have just helped me maybe, get further or do something quicker or make a decision quicker?
Yeah, I think it is quite difficult because I don't want to put pressure on teachers to know every career that's out there, because that's always going to limit. I think putting the encouragement out there to go look, think of just things you haven't thought of.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of information, and almost every profession has an institution that goes with it who would love to be doing more with young professionals and students, and actually the gap between them is quite difficult, and they can't force themselves into a school environment. So actually just encouraging kids to maybe, if you're interested, try speaking to some of these people and ask a few more. There's no harm in asking those institutions for things, and I think that it's too often a case of if you know someone, you go through that route, where there are now the options to try a different route, but I think people don't even realise they're there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then you graduated and you get into the workplace, and the reality of what you thought it was going to be like and what it was that miles apart, or was it, oh yeah, no, this is the work environment that I was expecting, this is pretty much in line with what I thought? Or was it a bit of a, okay, this isn't quite what I thought things were going to be like?
I think that, like most graduates, I was naive to the commercial element of life.
Yeah.
And everything costs money, and I think this is changing as well with environmental engineering projects, and we're looking at environmental economics has obviously grown massively, and trying to actually put value on the things they're doing. I found it very frustrating to write a report that was justifying doing nothing.
Right.
Because I think you come in with a romanticized version of what the job will involve, and we're going to make changes, we're going to improve things. And then some of the time you are literally writing a report that says there's no point investing in this option, and the money's got to go somewhere else. And kind of coming to terms with that, I think, is something that it's a bit disappointing when you've realised that there is going to be times in your career where you are literally writing a report that's going to go nowhere.
Yeah. And do you think, what's the biggest misconception about engineering? What people often think of, and then you think, well, it's not like that at all, actually, it's more like this.
I think it's what's included with engineering. I think, like my preconceptions were, people see it as sat doing calculations, typing away on a computer all day.
Yeah.
Where obviously the job relates into so many other things. There is, particularly for graduates, a large proportion of site work, which is getting you out and about and interacting with people. I think because people also don't realise that is what you might be doing as an engineer. You wear your high vis and get a lot of questions. And I think that is actually some of the worst gender discrimination that I've experienced. Tends to be a case of like collecting borehole water samples, and I've had a farmer come up, "What do you think you're doing, young lady?" And it's that phrasing is, while quite a common one, makes you feel like you're 5 years old, your hair's in pigtails, and you're about to, and it's like, well, I'm obviously collecting a water sample from a borehole.
Yes.
And I am doing my engineering role.
Yeah.
But there's this whole, like, you're doing something you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, you're not, it's jobs for the boys, and what are you doing on site?
Yes.
Yeah. And did you find that from the people that you worked with on site, or was it more from like the public that you would interact with? They'd think, what are you doing? Or did you find that when you went on site you were treated differently to maybe others?
I think you are treated differently some of the time. I think that's partly because it is a bit more unusual and they don't necessarily know how to interact with you. I think some of it is a lack of provision for ladies coming to site.
Yes. The practical side of being on a site.
Yeah. And that's kind of, you go to a quarry site and it's always, oh, well, you go off and use the site manager's toilet, and your colleagues will go off and use the normal toilets, which you're kind of segregated at that point. But you also see that slight look of panic of, oh no, we haven't cleaned the loos out.
Yeah.
So kind of that element of it.
Yeah. So that still hasn't changed. So that everybody's been saying this now we were interviewing a lady earlier, and she did her degree in 1980, and she was saying when she went to site, actually they didn't make site boots when you turned up on site that actually fitted, so she'd end up with kind of all these welly boot things over her shoes. If you go to site now, are there like female feet size there as boots?
It's definitely getting a lot better, and RPP suppliers always have women's options on their catalogue. However, it can be a case of they're being made to order, And
Right.
so you place the order and they don't arrive for another 6 weeks, which is quite difficult because it's great to get a graduate on site as soon as they hit the workplace. It's a big part of the work they do.
Yeah.
So it really limits them in that first couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And trying to then manage that.
And that purely is because they don't see site engineering for women particularly. It's for men. So we've got all the men's shoes and we've got all the men PPE, but maybe not quite so much for women.
Yeah, I think some of it's also like I don't have too much of an issue being the size I am. I think it's taken a very long time for the production to realise that women's bodies come in a huge number of shapes and sizes.
Okay.
So petite women generally have a much bigger problem. And
yeah, the trousers are probably like
yeah,
have to be rolled up 100 times.
Yeah. And if you're petite and busty, then you're really in trouble. Because it's like you'll get something really long in length and it's like still too tight across the chest.
Yeah. Yeah, which automatically, especially if you're going on site and it's your first time and you're nervous, because any new environment you know you're going to be nervous in, that could probably be really off-putting.
Yeah, and I think it's also when you're on site, as I think it is quite a hard physical job that contractors are doing, and generally call a spade a spade.
Yes.
So they will make a joke generally because they make a joke and they take the piss out of each other constantly, and that's actually a good sign. It means you are fitting in if they make jokes.
Yeah.
But if you turn up with something that's really, really obvious to make the joke about, they're going to be struggling not to make that joke all day.
Yeah.
So I think it is something that can be a little bit awkward.
Yeah. An intimidating environment when it probably doesn't need to be. Yeah. And just, the comfort side of being on a site. Just not having a toilet that you can use. Must be.
Yeah, and I think it's some of the planning side of it that's really, really awkward, particularly because it's generally the junior staff going on site and more senior staff planning.
Right.
And it's just something that doesn't necessarily occur to a man that they need to do.
Yeah.
And they'll go ahead and book you a site visit and you're like, can I not just go a week later, please?
Yeah.
And they're like, well,
what
no.
for? What?
Why? And you have to justify it. And it's like...
I'm going to spell it out to you.
Yes.
There's a really good reason why I just don't want to be on site that week. And if you've had to do that, what do they then say? You know, I'm not going on site that week. I've got my period. It will be awful. Please don't make me. You shouldn't have to say it, but do you have to say it that blatantly?
Most of the time you don't. I usually go for if you ask me again, I will spell it out.
Yes.
But I think it will make you as uncomfortable as it does me.
Yeah.
And then they usually realise, right. But yeah, so sometimes you do have to be quite blunt about it. Because I think it can be seen as you're just being difficult because it's just not occurring to them as a reason why.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things, it feels quite awkward having had the conversation a couple of times.
Yeah.
It's not something to worry about.
Yeah.
And I think it's also changing as well. I think in society it's become something that men are getting more used to being a topic of conversation.
It's not taboo anymore. We can talk about
and
it.
On times when I've felt I've been bluntest, there is usually a male graduate being like, you asked for that. So they've picked up straight away of why you're wanting to move it, and their sisters have had the conversations with them a lot more than the generation above them. So I think it is evolving, but it takes time.
Yeah, but it's getting better, which is encouraging to hear, so that's good. So we want to continue these series of videos, and we wondered if you'd got anybody that you could kind of nominate that we could speak to next that you think would be happy to talk about their career, their experiences, why they became an engineer. Is there anyone that you know that you could nominate?
Yes, I feel a bit bad doing this to you because I know you were trying to get her, but Louise Beale would be very good for doing it. She's very technically skilled. As I've been in the industry a lot longer than me, and she's someone who she'll be really embarrassed that I'm saying this, but from the outside looks like she's managed the balancing it all.
Right.
I know there are times where it probably is a facade and the panic goes on behind it all.
Yeah.
But I found that very helpful as having, a woman who, manages the family, getting on top of all the technical, and she's always pushing that forward.
Yeah.
But still having time to talk to little old me when I'm having a panic about the most inconsequential, oh no, I don't know how to ask my client this. And
she got time for you.
Yeah.
Which is so important, and someone to look up to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank
you.